Good day, everybody. We're doing the Bible in a year, 2021, day 76, Deuteronomy 17, 8, yeah, 17, 18, 19, and 20. I'm excited to share today because today we get to touch on some scriptures that are some of my most favorite scripture to deal with because it deals with some things that I've never heard really taught on or talked about, which is really the governance that the Lord set up, that Yahweh set up for Israel. Quite often we just talk about the king and the high priest, and we don't understand that there's other elements of this government. And we're going to look at that today, probably spend more time on that than anything else that we look at. So let's move forward. First of all, let's deal with capital punishment, shall we? It's I'm not even going to bring up the scripture. Let's just summarize this thing that takes place between verse 2 and 8. Um, there's a few things. There's a few things that carry with it the top punishment of death. Okay, but we're dealing with one here, and it's the most important one, and it's the breaking of the covenant by being involved in idolatry. It is being unfaithful to Yahweh. That's what it really is. It's like a marriage, and you're being unfaithful to Yahweh because you're fooling around with other gods. Um, However, as severe and as important as this is, we're dealing with capital punishment. So this has to be thoroughly investigated, fully investigated. You can't just fly off the handle and accuse somebody. We've heard of the blasphemy laws that there are in some countries, some Muslim countries, and it doesn't take much to bring accusation against somebody, and it's very it's very difficult to disprove those things. But in this case, what we see was established in Israel was that it, it, it was harder to prove that somebody did this. Um, there was you had to investigate. You had to have the proof. You couldn't just go on the whim. You couldn't do it because you didn't like somebody, and so you're going to accuse them. It's not because you wanted their land or anything of the sort. This was going to be fully investigated, and there are, and there are consequences if you brought false accusation. So it's also established here that there has to be 2 to 3 witnesses in all capital punishment cases, uh, 2 or 3 witnesses. It cannot be established by one witness. Um, Setting that aside now, let's start in on this whole thing about the government or the governance. In verse 9, it says, go to the Levitical priests and to the head judge in office. The head judge. Okay, underline that, head judge in office. So head judge is an office. Okay, it's among the Levitical priests. It's part of the priesthood. Later on down the road, we'll see that some of the kings acted like a judge. We see that. We see that David acted like a judge, but um, David wasn't normal. David was unique. Okay, but in most cases, the head judge is going to be part of the Levitical priesthood. Okay, so go to the Levitical priests and to the head judge in office at that time and look into things there. They will announce to you the correct ruling because they have access to all the laws and case laws and everything else that's been established. So that's a head judge. So if there's a dispute on a ruling with a lower court judge, it can go to the high court, if you want to put it that way, to the head judge. Um, so I think, yeah, let's move on from there. So this is so we know of the priests, the high priests, and now we have the head judge, high priest, head judge. I always refer to it as the high judge, but it's the head judge. So we have the high priest and the head judge. And these two, okay, they're a position of great authority. And we see here in verse 12, and whoever acts rashly by not listening to the priest who is in office, serving the Lord your God, or to the head judge, will die. Wow. Yeah, some authority there. Remove such evil from Israel. Okay, so if you act rashly, if you act against the priest, if you act against the head judge, consequences are you die. Okay. Now, here is something really important. This is before they go into the promised land. This is before. This is under Moses. This is coming in under Moses before they even set foot in the promised land. You can indeed appoint over you a king. You can indeed appoint over you. So if you want a king, you can have a king. But look at this, that the Lord your God selects. Now, if those of you who have already read through scriptures many times, you will recall many stories of the prophet coming to anoint the person who's going to be king. That's the Lord selecting. The Yahweh sends in his prophet to anoint the king, to select the king. So that the Lord your God selects. You can appoint over you a king who is one of your fellow Israelites. You are not allowed to appoint over you a foreigner who is not one of your fellow Israelites. So we've got to get this in our heads, that the Lord, long before the people cried out for a king, they weren't crying out for anything that the Lord had not already made allowances for. We need to understand that, because here he's making the allowances, and he's making it clear, that there's going to be some rules around this. I get to select. You can have a king, but I get to select them. So it's almost taken the shape of a republic, if you want to put it that way. A republic, but instead of with an elected president, you have a monarch. Okay, and the monarch is Yahweh. Yahweh is the monarch. Okay, he is like in the president position. He is the monarch, and he will appoint his prime minister. Okay, so Yahweh's the head, and he appoints his prime minister, who's going to be the king. So now we have a king, a high priest, and a head judge. That's what we have so far for the governance. A king, a high priest, and a head judge. Okay. We're not done yet. Now, look at this. This is really important to understand, that Yahweh is concerned about abuse. He's concerned about abuse. And kings in this world tend to consolidate all the power, all the wealth belongs to the king. So we have here that granted, the king must not acquire too many horses, and he must not return the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses, because the Lord told you, you will never go back by that road again. The king must not take numerous wives, so that his heart doesn't go astray, nor can the king acquire too much silver and gold. So look at it again. He cannot really take part in the horse trade. He can't have much horses. He can't have too many wives, and he can't have too much wealth. If we consider King Solomon, and I'll point that out when we get to it, but when we consider King Solomon down the road, he broke all of those rules rather quickly. He actually gained a much of his wealth in horse trade, and guess how he did that horse trade? Sorry, just little family emergencies keep interrupting me here today. That doesn't usually happen. So anyway, just back to Solomon here. Solomon, yeah, his whole horse trade thing was with Egypt. He went back. He actually, married Pharaoh's daughter. He had this horse trade thing going on. So he was dealing. He had a lot of horses, and that's how he made his money. And then he turned around, and the whole thing about his wives, exactly what the Lord had warned against. You can't have these wives because they will turn your heart. And he was wealthy. There was nobody as wealthy as Solomon was, and we know that he had a terrible fall. It wasn't what the Lord had designed for him whatsoever, and he had a terrible fall. And yeah, it was we just look and we can understand why. Um, Now, here, I might be with a bit of controversy, and so like I'm just throwing this idea out there for you to consider. It's where I am, but I'm not telling you that um, this is just how I read it. Okay, so this is one of these things, in my opinion. Okay, I'm not coming at you from somewhere with the spirit. I'm telling you, in my opinion. Okay, so um, we see here for the king, this is given to the king. Instead, when he sits on his royal throne, he himself must write a copy of this instruction on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. That instruction must remain with him, and he must read it in every day of his life so that he learns to revere the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this instruction and these regulations by doing them. Now, I can understand fully how we can read this and say this is the law of Moses that we're talking about. He has to copy that out, and he has to read it and study it all the time, and we can understand that. But I put forward to you just the possible chance that actually what's being talked about here is the instruction that was just given for the king, the instruction for the king about the horses, about the wives, about the wealth, and that is to be written out. I'm not going to dwell on that too long. I'm just going to throw that out there because this is a law for just the king. This is the king's law. This is the king's set of instructions. So, just something for you to consider. Um, and then we're told here this is the means of success right here. Um, the instruction must remain with him, and he must read it every day of his life so that he learns to revere the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this instruction and these regulations, by doing them, by not being overbearing toward his fellow Israelites. That's the whole purpose here, is the king would not consolidate all the power, all the wealth, and everything else, because that would cause an imbalance in the governance that is being set up. He doesn't want them to be overbearing toward his fellow Israelites, and by deviating even a bit from the commandment. See, a bit from the commandment. If the king does all that, he will ensure lasting rule in Israel for himself and for his successors. Yeah, this is the Lord in his perfection putting this forward, because he can't put forward any plan that isn't perfection, and then we know what happens to this, right? Okay. Now, in Deuteronomy 18 here, we're going to move on. And now, listen, there is a way to access the spiritual that is permitted, which is Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, and then there is a way that is not permitted. Okay, and in this case, what we're talking about is through the priests. The priests had access. They had all the regulations, the things that they had to be careful of, because you open the wrong door, you get burnt. Step in the wrong place, you get blown up. So it was a very dangerous thing, and the Lord had given them a roadmap of how to stay safe in doing this. Um, but there was an illegal way, okay, the forbidden way of accessing it as well, and that's what was just listed. It's just listed here. There must not be anyone among you who passes his son or daughter through fire, who practices divination, is a sign reader, fortune teller, sorcerer, or spell caster. who converses with ghosts or spirits or communicates with the dead. All who do these things are detestable to the Lord. It is on account of these detestable practices that the Lord your God is driving these nations out before you. Listen, a lot of people tell you that this is the Lord protecting people from charlatans. It's not. This is powerful stuff. It is wrong. It opens doors. It's a demonic thing. People end up. Listen, just stay away from this. Just stay away from it. The Lord absolutely forbid us from dealing with these things. I wouldn't even look at a horoscope. Some of the stuff is just fake stuff. But you don't know the difference. Don't go there. Don't touch this stuff. You can't do it. Unfortunately, what has happened, um, because the society has permitted more of this, and we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about the spiritual realm, and there's some terminology, some things that have in common with our practices because we're dealing with the same thing. And because of that, what's happened is that Christians have stepped away from it completely, because it's just like not wanting to use the name Yahweh. You just want to be careful. And doing that, they have denied themselves access to these incredible places that the Lord has opened the door for us to access, freely and through Jesus Christ, going by way of the gate, not going over the wall. And it's so sad. It's so sad that people are living a one-dimensional relationship, with our Father, when we've been called into a 3D relationship with Him, beyond 3D, 5D, 6D, 7D, whatever, just beyond anything, beyond our imagination. And we've been called in to live this, but not this way, not this stuff. Stay away from it. Don't go there. I'm telling you, you will get infected in ways that you could not possibly even believe. Okay. So now we come back to the governance again. Yeah. Verse 15, the prophet. Okay. So we have the high priest, that was the first one introduced. We have the head judge, second one introduced. We had the king introduced to us, and now we have the prophet introduced to us. The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me from your community, from your fellow Israelites. He's the one you must listen to. He's the one you must listen to. What? Even more than the king? He's the one you must listen to. He is the living voice of Yahweh. You've got the written word, you've got all the instructions written down, you've got all that sort of stuff, but you've got the living voice of Yahweh, who is going to show up and give instructions for the moment that you're in. And we see it. We see different prophets being raised up at different times, and there's different types of prophets. There's prophets like Jonah, who just came in, and he was just that voice. And then you have other prophets like Elisha and well, Elijah and Elisha, and that's the line of Elijah, really, that power and signs and wonders and all this sort of stuff. Um, but they are the living voice of Yahweh. They will provide counsel for the king. It's so important here. It's so important. And what we have, um, uh, we have some cases in the history where a king acts as a judge, but we also have the priest who acted like judge and prophet as well. Not the king, but as the high priest, the prophet, and the head judge. And so different people, sometimes the offices get combined with one person, but there are the four offices that make up this government, and it's right there. It should be clearly seen. And again, because just like with the king, this is a powerful position. There needs to be some protection that is put in place so the people don't face abuse. And so what do we have? What do you do about a false prophet? Here's the answer. The prophet who speaks in the Lord's name and the thing doesn't happen or come about, that's the word the Lord hasn't spoken. That prophet spoke arrogantly. Don't be afraid of him. Okay, that's not saying that person wasn't a prophet, but that prophet could become an abuser. That prophet can step out from just repeating what he hears to um, using his own voice and pretending that it is Yahweh. That type of abuse that happens. And we heard earlier also that a false prophet is anybody who's leading people away from Yahweh. Okay, so there's this thing about they're speaking in their own voice, and the things that they're saying is not happening. And then you have the whole thing about leading people away from Yahweh. But when we stop and consider this, a word is given and then it doesn't happen. Is this why Jonah was upset? Is this why what upset him in Nineveh? That he would be considered a false prophet because he said that Nineveh was going to be destroyed? People repented hoping that Yahweh would change his mind, and he did. So the thing that Jonah said didn't happen, and then Jonah kind of has a sulking fit, right? But understand that if anybody is found to be a false prophet, they're killed. So you can kind of understand why Jonah here might be a little bit upset, but we all know that his whole motivation in his heart was wrong in this matter. So we won't go any further there. So here we have the governance of Israel. Okay, Yahweh, he's the head of state. Okay, he's the head. He is the power over all things. Okay, you have the high priest responsible for overseeing the worship of Yahweh, and by saying that, keeping the regulations, the festivals, all the things that they're supposed to be doing, the high priest is responsible for that. He has to go in and make those sacrifices once a year in the presence, all this sort of thing. The head judge is responsible for overseeing Yahweh's justice, his laws, his case laws, overseeing the whole judicial system and making sure that it's a justice that has fairness and there's no abuse that's going on. That's the responsibility of the head judge. Then you have the king, and the king's responsibility is for administering really the defense and providing an atmosphere of prosperity of the nation. He is the one responsible for relationships with other nations, coming up with trade partners and that sort of stuff. That is his responsibility. And then you have the prophet, who is the voice of Yahweh today, and in many cases became the conscience of the king, whether it was good king or bad king. And that was a dangerous place for the prophet, because when the king didn't like what Yahweh is saying, it was the prophet who would end up dying. That was a very dangerous position to be in at that time, was the prophet. Okay, and then the chapter 19 here. Um, justice defined by Yahweh. That's what we have to understand. Yahweh is the definition of justice. And that's what we find here in these 13 verses. He is the definition of justice, and yet we will learn, we're going to learn this down the road, that he prefers mercy over judgment. But he is the measuring rod of justice. If we want to know what justice looks like, we compare it to him. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and he defined it. He defines what is right. He defines what is wrong. He defines morality. It doesn't matter whether the world wants to follow that definition or follow their own. Man, that's going to be up to them. But we, as the followers of Jesus Christ, we take the definition from our Father, from his heart, from what he says. We don't get to define it for ourselves. It's right there. It's clear in the word. That's how it is. In this justice, he protects the innocent, and he punishes the guilty. And he's also declared that innocent blood pollutes the land. We read that earlier. Innocent blood. That's how much he hates the abuse of the innocent. Is it just pollutes the land, and he'll kick out Israel because of it. Witnesses are needed for judgment. Okay, witnesses are very important. A solitary witness against someone in any crime, wrongdoing, or in any sort of misdeed that might be done is not sufficient. This is verse 15, by the way. The decision must stand by 2 or 3 witnesses. So this is important for capital offenses, but it's also true for every accusation. 2 or 3 witnesses, minimum. Um, and then there's this protection that comes in that I had alluded to with the capital offenses, protection against false witnesses in verse 19. Then you must do to him what he had planned to do to his fellow Israelite. Remove such evil from your community. That's where tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye idea come in. So like there's many things here that he's putting in place to protect people from abuses, from kings who want to abuse them, from prophets who want to abuse them, from witnesses who want to abuse people. Just yeah, just understand how important this is. Okay, and then the last chapter, just a few things here to touch on. Dealing with war, the most important rule of war is remembering Yahweh. When you march out to battle your enemies and you see horses, chariots, and a fighting force larger than yours, don't be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, the one who brought you up from Egypt, is with you. That's the most important thing about the war. And then we have the rules of warfare right here. Bang, 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 bang. Okay, just summarizing this. Okay, it's all here in the chapter. Read it for yourself. So number 1, remember Yahweh is with you. Number 2, the priest is the encourager. The high priest has to come in and encourage the troops, reminding them about Yahweh. 3, there are exemptions. There are exemptions of who is allowed to be in the fighting force. So they have to exempt anyone who has embarked on anything new, whether they've just planted a crop that they haven't tasted, or whether they've just built a new house, whether they just got married. Okay, they are released. They're exempt, so that for a little while they can enjoy that new thing that they've embarked on. Then they had to send home anyone who's afraid, because fear is contagious, and they didn't want that. If you're afraid, you had to go home. That would have been a hard one. Okay, all of you who are afraid, you can leave. Can you imagine? Like, who wants to be the first one to move, right? The fifth thing about the rules of warfare here is they were to offer peace to any city that was at a distance from them. So instead of going in and destroying it, they were allowed to come in and say, hey, we're offering you peace. Just let us rule over you. We won't destroy you. We won't kill you. You'll become part of our kingdom. So like that's what they were to offer them. And the 6th is that they were not allowed to show mercy to the 7 nations. They had to destroy completely the 7 nations. There were no exemptions. And the 7th one really is one of these weird ones. It's like don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. It's just one of those really interesting things. Don't damage the fruit trees. Don't damage the fruit trees. Every now and then, this weird one gets thrown in just to remind us that Yahweh is, he's not just occupied with us in creation, but he is occupied with all of creation. We're just the pinnacle of the creation. And we have the responsibility of looking after the creation. That's interesting there. Okay, so there we are. That is done. And I hope that you found that interesting, because it's some of my it's I like to talk about that scripture, because not a lot of people realize about the governance of Israel. So it's very interesting. So you guys be blessed today. Be encouraged. You are learning lots. Your mind is probably reeling with some of this stuff. And I just encourage you. Keep going. Keep going. Day 76. Done. It is done. And we'll see what we have for tomorrow. You guys be blessed. Looking forward to spending the time with you. God bless.